Hey guys, Chris from the Ultimate Recycler. I'm in my shed today. I need to get onto some projects. This place is just becoming very claustrophobic. So I had a bit of a theory. I thought the first thing I trip over, that'll be today's project. Let's get it out of here. So what we have is a brass fire screen that needs some repair. I'll show you what I mean. This is pretty much a solid brass fire screen. It probably dates to the, I'm not sure, maybe 60s, 70s. It's a bit hard to tell. It's got a nice brass mesh on it. It's a square tube hollow brass frame, and the hinges are broken, both sides. So we're going to be doing some soldering, and hopefully we can resolder these little pipe pieces back on to fix up the hinges. There's no other damage to it. It appears to be complete, and it came from a shed I cleaned out, and we do get a lot of things like this when we clean out sheds. It no doubt would have been put in someone's shed who was well-meaning and planning to fix it one day, and he just never got to it, and whether it was a deceased estate or they moved away, but the bottom line is it was a project that just no one ever got to. My dilemma then is, what do I do with it? It is brass. I could just throw it in the scrap bin, but being a hollow tube, it actually doesn't weigh a great deal, and it would only go as irony brass or dirty brass anyway, because there's quite a bit of solder on it. I'll flip this panel over and show you. So it is soldered right around, so there's a high lead content in that solder. So a scrapyard wouldn't buy it as clean brass. There's going to be some steel possibly in the posts there for the ball feet. So anyway, as scrap brass, it's probably only worth $5 or so. If I can quickly and successfully fix the hinges, then I reckon we would get probably between $50 and $75 for it as an operational fire screen to sell through the shop. So I thought I might as well film it. What we have to do is basically just resolder the hinges. Now, from what I can work out, the little wings have, this one's broken clean off. They have two sections of pipe, one there, and by the look of the solder, one there. And then on the main piece, there's actually three sections of pipe. And then it has a steel rod that just slips through to create the hinge. I'll spin this one right over and we'll have a look at this end. So the steel rod is a bit bent and a bit rusty, so we'll have to get that out first. That one's still attached. That one is meant to go on the wing, and that's loose. That one's still attached. Again, that one's meant to go on the wing, and this one is supposed to be on this piece and attached. So there's a fair bit of soldering to do. What I'm going to do first is try and get these pins out, or this long steel rod. This one's going to slide out fine by the looks of that, and we'll have to clean it up a bit. It's a bit rusty in places, and we'll straighten that bent piece at the end. So then we can solder the little tube sections back in place. Now I've spun the whole thing over here so we can see exactly what needs doing. Both ends are broken. So this end we have one to do there, and I think the middle one, yeah. So the two on the wing on this end are actually fine, but the rod is also bent at the bottom here, so I'll have to straighten that to get that out. The other end, as you saw, came out okay, but we also have one missing off the main section, and the two on the wing also need replacing. So the first step is I'll straighten these steel rods. I'll clean them up just with a little bit of emery so they slip through the pipe cleanly. And then I think we can use the rod to hold the tubes in place while we solder them. And that way they should be nicely aligned. Now, there's nothing else at all wrong with this screen, and if it did have damage to the mesh, or if some of the feet were missing or something, it wouldn't be economical to try and fix it. I'd throw it straight in the scrap brass, so it'd be recycled that way. But I think it's going to be economical. Tools of the trade here, we've got some old solder. It's a resin core solder. We also have a big electric iron, which might generate enough heat, I'm not sure. And you would use something like this to solder if you had something that could be damaged by the heat. Say there were timber panels, you wouldn't use gas. And I'm going to try and use because there's no issues of burning anything, I'll try and use this propane gas and see if we can get the solder to flow with that. I also have some Baker's soldering fluid, which is a flux, and it will help the solder flow and stick to the brass. I'll have to get a little bit of emery paper too, just to clean up, because there'll be a bit of oxidation and we probably might just heat the solder and just get it to flow a little bit to freshen it up before we try and join the pipe. So first thing is to get these steel rods out, cleaned and straightened. Okay, I think this will slide off here. Yep, it's got a bend there, obviously we have to straighten too. And this piece is a bit too tight. So we might free that up a little bit with a hammer and a tick. And this one, we're going to have to straighten this end because this end's bent. We'll grab the pliers for that. I think it should bend pretty easily. There we go, that should do. Bit of encouragement. I think this has been in the weather for some time, it's very rusty. And now we'll straighten these rods up a bit. Now the rod's straight here, but this piece still won't come off, so we're going to have to give it a little bit of jarring with the hammer. Not too much because the brass is very soft. There we go, that's all it needed. Just to free up, you can see it was rusty inside. Next, we just want to clean these rods up just with a bit of sandpaper. And wipe them over with a bit of paste wax so that they don't re-rust easily, and also it will make them slide through the brass tubes much easier. Now the secret to a good soldering job is to get plenty of heat and preparation. Now I haven't actually used this large soldering iron before, it's one I found recently and thought that's coming home, it might be handy. And we've got plenty of heat. I've just tinned the copper tip there, and it's always a good idea to leave a little bit of solder, fresh solder on the tip of your iron, so when you're finished put some more on it and just sort of wipe it with a rag so it stays nice and clean. And I'm also going to use some flux, some Baker's soldering fluid, which I'll just apply with a brush, and I'm just going to put a little bit along this area that needs to be freshly soldered. And this is the old solder, so I'm just going to remelt this, freshen it up, and with the flux it should flow nicely. So hopefully we get enough heat from this large iron to just freshen it up. Now I'll put a little bit more solder on the tip, and we'll just run it across that existing solder, and this will have the added benefit of smoothing out any lumps, so the piece of tube will sit nice and flat against it. Yeah, that seems to be getting enough heat in there quite well. Beautiful. So we'll also tin the little tube, and again I'm just going to run a little bit of flux along there. I've just got the actual pipe clamped in a vise here, so I'll just tin that section. There's virtually no solder on this piece. Some of the other pieces of tube actually have still quite a bit of solder on them, so we'll just see if we can smear some fresh solder along there. And it gets it prepared to be joined. Now, a thin piece of tube will heat up a lot quicker than the other frame. That looks like it's sticking quite nicely. Okay, no lumps on there, that should fit up very snugly with the frame. And once we've done the same preparation with each section, obviously not the ones that are still securely attached, then we can align all the pieces with our rod and solder them in position. Okay, let's see if we can do this top piece of pipe with the electric iron. Hopefully we'll get enough heat into it. So we've got it lined up there. We'll put a bit more flux on here so the solder is going to flow very well. We don't want to get the flux down inside the tube because we don't want to solder the pin to the pipe. Now, we've got our wing lined up nicely, and the hinges will work so that it doesn't drop down. We've got them lined up in the right spots. So let's get some heat into here. I'll start just at the bottom. And I don't know if I'm going to get enough heat with this iron into this frame. So I want to get the metal, both sides of the metal, hot enough to melt the solder. I don't want to just melt it on the iron and drop it in blobs. And yes, it looks like we're going to get enough heat. That's great. So I'm feeding a bit of solder in whilst I'm working the iron back and forward. And it's certainly attaching to the frame. We haven't got it attaching to the pipe yet. I've put a bit of heat across onto that. That's looking really good. So now that I've anchored the bottom, I'll start at the top. Again, it'll take a while to build up the heat. And we'll just work the iron down along the piece of pipe and keep feeding a bit of extra solder in there, and it should capillary action itself right into that join, and that iron's working very well. And then we meet up with a bit of solder we put at the end, and I'm very happy with that. It looks neat and it should be strong. So there we go, there's one end of the fire screen repaired. The solder took very nicely, looks quite neat, should be quite strong. The pin can spin freely, so that hasn't been soldered accidentally. And as far as the hinge goes, beautiful. Alright, we'll do exactly the same preparation for the other end, but this time we might see if we can solder with the propane gas and just see if it makes it much easier. Because it will generate a lot more heat a lot quicker. We'll see how it works. So this end, now I've had to stick the vise on the edge of the frame there just to keep it level because it's got a little bit of a twist in it. And I haven't done exactly the same preparation. I've cleaned them up, but I haven't tinned them. Now that one's loose there, it's in the right spot, and the other ones are ready to go. So I'm not going to use the iron at all, the electric iron. And I've put the pin through as they are, so everything's lined up in the right spot. And I'll paint each section with the soldering fluid, the flux, and then we'll just try the actual propane gas and the soldering iron and just see how it works. I like using an electric iron because you can use the point of the iron to smooth lumps out, whereas with the gas we kind of just got to let it flow. But we'll have a go and see if we can do it this way, because I appreciate not all of you will have a heavy duty soldering iron, and then again not all of you will have access to propane gas, or I think most of you would be able to get that pretty easily. So at least it'll be an interesting experiment to do one way and the other end the other way. The ultimate result will be I'll have a saleable fire screen. Rightio, let's light this up. There's not a lot of gas left in this bottle, but it should do the trick. And we want as small a flame as we can get because, oops, don't want it to go out, because the brass is only thin and it will heat up very quickly, and solder melts extremely quickly, unlike if you were brazing or something, you need a bit more heat. Now we want to direct our heat onto the thicker part, which is probably the main frame, and we'll see if it melts the existing solder. Yep, there we go. And we'll just get the new solder to flow in there. think we'll have to build up a fair bit, but it should work well. The solder's very thin, so I have to keep unwinding it. Ideally, you could probably use a stick of plumber's solder. I don't have any handy at the moment. Okay, two things. One, the heat affected the mesh a little bit, so the flames are a little bit more unforgiving than a soldering iron. The other problem is I soldered the wrong side. That one is supposed to be soldered to this main frame, and then this one here is supposed to be soldered to the wing. So that's a bit of an oversight, and I should have been paying more attention. I'm going to have to try and melt this solder and clean it up a bit, and then solder it again on the other side. Perhaps I'll do this one first here, and that may have been why I required a bit more heat onto the main frame section, because it actually wasn't tinned like it should have been. So mistake there. I thought I'd leave this in the video because we do need to pay attention with what we're doing. I'm not overly happy about the discoloration either. Perhaps a gentle wire brush, perhaps with a brass wire brush, would probably clean it up. But anyway, I'll have to unsolder that. But on the plus side, the solder did stick really well. It's still a bit hot. And the gas certainly works quite well to getting the solder to flow once you get some flux in there. But I'm going to have to fix this error. I'll be back with you shortly. Okay, so I used Old Faithful electric iron to clean this up, and it cleaned up fine, no issues there. So we'll get rid of that excessive solder, and we'll realign everything and try and do it on the correct side. Okay, this end's all fixed, and it went a little bit better once I got used to pushing the solder around with the flame. It does generate more heat though than certainly what the electric iron does, and it looks a bit messy there, and it's also heated the rod up quite a lot. So I think I prefer an electric, heavy duty electric soldering iron rather than using the gas in this instance anyway. I guess the advantage with the gas is that the solder probably flows better, and it's probably, if we look at that, it's probably a stronger join, because I think the solder would have got right round underneath. But anyway, it's complete and it works well. We will just have to try and clean it up a little bit, but basically that's finished the job. And two different options for doing it. Solder is very easy to use if you follow a couple of rules. Get the surfaces very clean and tin each side if you can, and certainly that showed on the electric soldering iron job where we tinned both sides and then just basically it flowed together. And use a good flux or a soldering fluid. Just the resin core solder isn't enough as far as flux goes, and you will have success with your soldering jobs. Alright, I'll have to find a soft brass bristled brush, and I think that will clean up okay. We'll have to see what it looks like from the other side. Yeah, it is still there, but it's barely noticeable. At least we have a saleable screen. Well, that completes this repair, guys. We have an operational fire screen that I can take back to the shop and sell. It swings, hinges beautifully, it's solid, it's sturdy, it folds up, and there's virtually no indications of that heat mark on the mesh on the front, just a little bit, but it's a fire screen, it's not going to matter. So I hope you've enjoyed that. Just a couple of options when you're soldering things. The messages are to preparation. Like everything, good preparation usually results in a good job. I kind of enjoyed doing that, and for really not a great deal of time I've turned some scrap into, I think I'll put $75 on it. And in winter, fire screens usually sell very quickly. Okay, job's done. Thanks for watching, guys. Now to walk around my shed and trip over the next thing that needs doing. Bye.